but I am from Juneau, and I just want to acknowledge and say thank you to the people of Sitka and to the Kiksadi people for allowing us to be visitors here and to make this presentation. I just finished a PhD in adult learning and was at Lesley University, which is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the reason I decided to get my PhD there was because I had been a college teacher for many, many years, teaching early childhood education at the University of Alaska Southeast, and all of my students were adults, and the majority of my students were Alaska Native women. And a lot of the work that I did was via distance, and a lot of the other work that I did in my role there was as a consultant and a teacher working in rural communities all over the state of Alaska. So maybe we should have the next slide. The title of my dissertation is Full Circle, and it's a portraiture study, and portraiture is a kind of qualitative research that is based on or founded in narrative or in stories. But what I wanted to say about this is that I started this dissertation when I was teaching, and I had all of these adult students. But my work there ended when the program I was coordinating was moved to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. So my whole project just basically went away. But I'd already started this, and I had begun it, and I really needed to make a decision about what I was going to do. And because I had been interested in the work of Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, who is a black teacher at the University of Harvard, I decided that I would do a portraiture study. And maybe we could go on with the next slide, but I just wanted to say a couple of things about the role of the full circle. When you have a circle, as you can have in the chocat blanket, and it's the only kind of weaving that a circle can be woven, you can't start the circle you have to complete the circle. So that sort of is the beginning of, I was completing the circle that I had started, and many of the stories that are involved in this dissertation are also stories of completing a circle, or finishing things, or bringing things to closure in not only literal and physical ways, but in spiritual ways. So just a couple of brief remarks about who I am as a teacher. Might be better, I guess, if we're off. Yeah. Well, as I said, I was a teacher professor at the University of Alaska Southeast for many, many years. And before that, I was a preschool teacher. And I think that in many ways I had a tremendous advantage because I was able to learn from children, and I was also able to learn from my students. And I'm not interested in sort of the more traditional forms of research. I'm interested in research that are problem posed or come out of the problems that exist for people in their work, or as opposed to my picking a problem or something that I think needs to be looked into. I was interested in action research, where you're really working with the real problems that people are facing in their work and their lives.
Okay.
Yes?
We got to improvise for just a moment.
Okay.
Don't mind, we don't want to lose you.
No, well,
Video.
it's kind of been an improvisation from the beginning.
How's the microphone? Is that in a good place?
Oh, I don't know. Is it? Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I apologize for my voice. I have a bad cold, and I'm not very kind of raspy. But anyway, I'm interested in, let me take my watch off and put it on the table, so sorry if I won't do it, or the time is rushing off to you. and I don't know how this is gonna work, because I think there is a person who's coming in here soon, right?
Well, there is a break after.
Yeah, just-
Oh, okay, so we do have a little space to go run over.
Okay.
All right, anyway, I'm interested in problems that occur and come up as part of my work as a teacher, that can arise in teaching from the people I work with. And then I did a lot of work when I first came to Southeast Alaska. I've lived in Southeast Alaska 50 years. I moved there in 1965. So it was a sort of different place then than it is now. And much of the most early activism that I was engaged in had to do with environmental issues. One was where the highway is in Juneau now. They wanted to build a highway out over the wetlands to Sunny Point, so that was my first big political battle I was engaged in. And then for several years, I worked on the Alaska Lands Bill in 1975. You all know about the results of the Alaska Native Plain Claims Settlement Act. That act, when it was finalized in 71, had a section D2, which you remember those words. Section D2 said that the remaining federal lands in Alaska would all go into the national land system. So I worked on that bill for a long time in Washington, D.C. until 1980, when Jimmy Carter finally signed the bill, and we were able to protect large portions of forest. And because of that, I was deeply involved with people from Angoon and people from Wrangell and also people from Yakutat. So I'm a social activist. I'm a feminist because I believe feminism is for everybody. It's not just having to do with work or being able to work. It's for everybody. It's for equality for everyone. And I became a Buddhist in 1972 and have been a practicing Buddhist since then, which is why we have a Shambhala Center in Juneau, Alaska. Next slide, please. Oh, and this Saga Perseverance Trail, that sort of epitomizes my full circle here. So the background problems that I identified as problems that needed maybe looking into with the study was Indigenous culture has suffered from degradations and decimations, and people have been marginalized in silence. That's changing, but it's still true. And research is usually done, most conventional sociological research is done on objects, as people as objects or situations as objects. And typical research focuses on problems. And the reason I liked the idea of portraiture was because Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, in her work, which began in the 1980s, really focused on goodness and looking for goodness, even though a person's life may be laced with imperfections, difficulties and hardships, but looking for strengths, looking for triumphs, and looking for goodness is the focus of portraiture. And that's why I chose it. And next slide, please. Or is this it? Okay, so another basic assumption that I started with was what could be learned from the experience of 3 people who were successful. Because again, another problem with most sociological research is that it starts with problems and it doesn't place a strong focus on success, on people who have been successful. Successful people usually get a lot of attention, but ordinary people, and of course none of the people who were my participants were really ordinary. Clarissa Rizal is one of them. Clarissa was really quite famous. But Hans Chester, one of the other participants in my study, is a teacher. He's an elementary school teacher. And then Nyla Reinhardt, who has become quite well known on the national level as an educator and an early childhood educator, but is probably not that well known, in sort of general ordinary circles, unless you happen to be an early childhood person. I wanted to focus again on the triumphs and successes of people who weren't famous, but who were outstanding. So that's why this study, this sample, is a small sample, which is okay in qualitative research. And the focus, again, should be on their strengths, their triumphs, and their successes. So the other thing about the study of portraiture is the biography, the autobiography or the biography of the portraitist, the researcher, it's just goes throughout everything. It permeates everything. It's infused with everything. So in some perspectives, many people would say, well, that's not very scientific. You know, you're supposed to be objective, right? You're not supposed to bring your life or your thoughts or your feelings into this that much. You're supposed to kind of absent yourself. But that would only, I think, really be true if you were doing a study that was quantitative, where you had a huge sample and you had all these people who were doing, you know, a lot of mathematical, statistical analysis at the end. But would you go back just one more? Back again. I wanted to just make one comment about, the portrait's voice itself is very much a part of this, but I wanted to emphasize this intersubjective aspect and co-creation and co-construction of knowledge that was involved in this research. Because I didn't do this by myself. I did this with these people. And they were my, not only were they my participants, but they were my teachers, and they were also people who had a tremendous influence on what the study ultimately became. So, next slide, please. So, I just will go real fast. The lit review just covers sort of all the basic things here of, you know, context. And there's a lot of context, and there has to be a huge amount of context for all of this to make sense in terms of colonization and the place, Southeast Alaska, where context, the physical life and physical world of Tlingits and the place names of the culture are so much a part of the way in which one understands and can make meaning of what it means to be Tlingit, or Tsimshian, or Haida for that matter. But one of the other aspects of learning that I did look into quite deeply is the whole issue of experiential learning, and I think it's safe to say that most people in the Native community, and I certainly think it's true for myself, learn through experience. We learn experientially, and we learn by doing things with each other and together. We don't necessarily learn from, you know, books or sitting by ourselves or learning alone. And the research, the theorist that I used mainly for that was Tara Fenwick. And an issue that is, of course, always coming up but left out because it's sort of messy is the issue of voice. And, you know, whose voice? And whose voice is going to be the major voice? And what are you going to do about the issues of voice and really fostering voice? And there's been a lot of study about this, but I do think that voice in many ways has been appropriated. And I tried to really look at this from a developmental perspective using lifespan development as well as looking at the research on voice. And so next slide, please. So it's, anyway, why I chose it. It's qualitative, it's descriptive, it's interpretive. I think that the other thing that's important about narrative or portraiture is that it's embodied. You do it with another person, you're with other people, and you're in naturalistic settings. You're observing as you would be observing if you were a biologist or a person in the field. But I think that the other issue, you went too fast. Oh, okay. Well, and it's a co-created process. And again, focus on goodness and strength. And we can go to the next slide. Okay, so the people that were participants in the study were Clarissa Resolve, who is from Puna. Her family were from Puna. They were the Sarabia family. And her grandfather was Filipino, and her father, Bill Lempy, was Filipino. Her mother was Takiantan, and from Puna, and I think was a very important family. But Clarissa grew up in a mixed heritage family, and she was not necessarily encouraged to become a weaver or to become an artist. In fact, she was discouraged, which is a little different approach or a little different look at Clarissa's life than perhaps Aldana shared with us. But so wasn't encouraged to become an artist. Her mother had come to Juneau probably in the 40s or Clarissa was born in 1956. So her mom came to Juneau, became a successful woman. She had a state job, a good job. She had 2 children from a prior marriage, and then she divorced in that marriage and married Bill Lampy and had 4 more children. So it was a family of 6, and they didn't have a lot of money. I mean, Irene, of course, was making a state worker's salary, but Bill did a whole variety of jobs, and he was a fisherman. And so they struggled financially. And Clarissa's mother, Irene, wanted Clarissa to get a good job, have good retirement, and one of the things that she felt was that she said, my life, nothing is the way it was when I was growing up. So I'm not going to teach you Tlingit. I was punished for speaking Tlingit in school, and I'm not going to teach you Tlingit. And so Clarissa was sorry that she'd never learned to speak Tlingit. But she said, I'd do the same thing when she thought about her mother's stance on taking this position of not teaching the kids Tlingit and getting a good job and having retirement and being secure financially. Hans is another participant in my study, and his family were from Yakutat. They were Raymond Coho. So the Raymond Coho clan is a very large clan, and his grandfather was a fairly well-known Tlingit leader from Yakutat. But when in the 40s, when tuberculosis was sweeping Alaska, he was sent to Mount Edgecombe because he had tuberculosis, and he met his wife-to-be there, who was Aleut. And Hans would laugh and say, well, I'm really not even technically a Tlingit, because my grandmother was an Aleut. But Nora Takak, who was his grandmother, or Dora Takak, who was his grandmother, was adopted. But, as Hans would put it, some of the more conventional conservative Tlingit leaders didn't approve of that marriage. And even though they approved of her adoption and all of that, there were still these issues of belonging. But Hans' family moved to Juneau for work, and he went to public schools in Juneau. He's a teacher in the school that he went to as a child. But life was not easy for Hans in Juneau because he was teased a lot. Boys called him a girl. He played with Dora, his sister, most of the time until she told him, I'm not going to play with you anymore. You have to go play with somebody else. And he really struggled with these issues of who am I and what sort of boy am I supposed to be, or what sort of person am I supposed to be. And his mother, Esther, was, suffering, I think, quite a bit from what might be called intergenerational grief or trauma. And her life was pretty chaotic, although she maintained a family and she was married. And Hans' father is Norwegian and met Esther in Yakutat. And so he was a stable person in their life, but he didn't necessarily intervene when Esther may be angry or in chaos of some kind. So Hans describes his childhood as chaotic, very chaotic. And really a lot of wondering about what to do next. Nyla is from Taos Pueblo, and she's lived most of her adult life here. She's married to Albert Reinhardt, who's from Wrangell. She's Tehiton, which is the same clan as the Pauls, your fan, I think, the Tehiton clan. And Albert is Kagwantan. But Nyla has really wanted to learn more and become knowledgeable about Tlingit culture, but never felt that she was knowledgeable. But her life in the Taos Pueblo was very rich, and she had a very strong grandparents, and a strong father, and a strong adopted grandmother who cared for her, because her mother left their family when Nyla was 12. So Nyla has, I think, really been interested in issues of trauma, in not only the ways that affected her own family, but in the ways that affected so many of the people that Nyla worked with when she came to Alaska to work at Head Start. And it was complicated having another culture, having another Native American culture as part of this study. So the data collection was the traditional, typical interviews and conversations and transcriptions of interviews and observations. I did not have permission from any other relatives of Nyla or the other folks, Clarissa, and hence to interview people in their families, which would have given a nice other perspectives. But I used Carol Gilligan's, her voice-related analysis, relational analysis, which is a kind of complicated way of analyzing transcribed data, where you listen and you continue to listen. You do a minimum of 4 listenings, and then you listen for the contrapuntal voices or the discrepancies of the different voices that emerge. And that's how I did my analysis. And one of the pieces of that analysis is the creation of I poems, which you write down the first person statements that start with I in the transcribed data, and you create poems. And of course, a lot of those poems I did include in my first draft of my dissertation, but it was just it just became too much. But those are very revealing, and the writing of I poems is, I think, a wonderful way to approach this whole process of, what do those I statements mean? And the contrapuntal voices, as I said, are the voices that are sort of discrepant, and then from that you compose the analysis. So there were a lot of ethical issues. How are we doing? Are we almost done? There were the ethical issues, again, of how do you deal with issues of privacy or issues of people's sharing of very intimate data. And the way that I dealt with the ethical issues was simply to send these things that were transcribed back to them and say, what do you think about this? I mean, is this true? Is this how you want to say this, And that becomes complicated because ultimately it becomes, you're co-writing at that point, and then whose voice dominates? Are you the author or are they the author? Whose story is going to be? So I had to learn how to dance with that and deal with that. And it involved just a lot of back and forth, phone conversations, sending papers back and forth, and emails, and kind of a constant working together on how do we want to present this. We'll go back to the Egyptian-Thunderbird. Clarissa, as I said, her mother and father didn't really want her to become a leader. And when Hunter Jorans commissioned this role, which was really for Helen Watkins, who is Thunderbird from Haynes, and it was given to be worn by Helen's daughter, Lonnie. This was kind of a totally different thing for a Chilkat weaver to do, because not only are the colors not the traditional Chilkat colors, but the design of the, if you saw Aldana's or heard Aldana's talk, of the god Horus, with the sun above his head, and the wings, the wings here, I can't remember if the wings with Horus are going more down, but the wings here are going up. And then the scarab motif was something that Clarissa actually wanted to adopt, because Clarissa actually believed that a lot of the forms that you see in formline design are actually Egyptian-like, if you look at Egyptian art. So Clarissa is remarkable in many ways, but I think to draw this somewhat to a close, the issue again of human development and lifespan development that I really wanted to start with, because I wanted to know how these people developed who they thought they were, their identities, and how they decided what they were going to do, and how they became successful, were really all, really were all very complicated. And it was not easy, it was not fraught without difficulties for them. I mean, they just didn't automatically, in adolescence decide that that everything was going to fall into place. And for Hans, it definitely didn't. And he had, I think, a really remarkable motivational trajectory, or motivation to learn Tlingit. When he was little, he had an experience of going to a gold medal tournament and having Tlingit elder. His mother wanted him to climb up to the top of the bleachers and say hello to the Tlingit elders, and he didn't want to go up there. He said, I don't want to go up there. I don't know them. I don't want to go and talk to those people who smell funny, and how sometimes your elders smell of wood smoke or whatever. And but he went up there, and an elder spoke to him and asked him, they were speaking Tlingit, and asked him if he spoke Tlingit. And Hans said no, and I think Hans must have been 5 or 6 about this time. And he didn't, he said, I don't speak Tlingit. And the elder said to him, you're not a Tlingit if you don't speak your language. And for some reason, that just pierced him as this young child, and this became his motivation through his life. And he didn't learn Tlingit from his family. He learned Tlingit at the university. And I want to acknowledge Florence Shakely, who's in the audience, because Florence was one of his, and Florence is Nora Dellenhauer's sister. Nora was also one of Hans' teachers, but Hans learned Tlingit at the university, at the University of Southeast. But he's a fluent speaker. And what's remarkable, I think, about all of these people, Nora and, okay, this is Nyla. What's remarkable about them is that in the developmental trajectory, you might call it, they have all become people who have given, it's not just giving back, because I don't think they view it as giving back. They view what they've done as ways of, or paying back. They view what they've done as giving a gift. And because they are generative in this way, most people are generative and grow to adulthood. We raise children and we feed them and take care of them, are generative in those conventional sorts of ways. But these 3 people are generative in unconventional ways. Unconventional in the sense of Clarissa, in the tremendous body of work that she has left us with, and and we have work. She's here with her work, and with Hans, with his language, and his work with people, kids mainly, to learn language, and with other people, and with Nyla, as you all know how important children are to Native people. Well, Nyla was giving what she could to make life better for young children, young Native children. And that was true in her work with Head Start in Southeast Alaska, and it's true with her work now nationally with Native children all over the United States. So what they're doing is preserving culture, and in a sense, this dissertation is a way of recognizing that and is preserving culture too. And belonging, of course, is always an interesting topic. And there are all sorts of ways that you can feel that you belong, or other people can help you feel that you belong. But it all has to do, again, with communion and with the agency that these people had and brought to their work. And there are tremendous benefits to that, to them and the community. So, I'm not going to read the last part, but I think we'll stop here. And I don't know if there are any questions concerning this, but